The Central Club.
What's going on, people? Welcome to the Central Club. This episode is brought to you by Re-Inspire Printing and Weekend Defender. If you haven't already, make sure you hit that like button, subscribe to the club, and hit the bell button to be notified of future content. Today, we have an extraordinary guest, a topic we have never really covered on the Central Club, but is important. Growing up in school, watching movies, and listening to the mainstream media, climate change has always been something that has been thrust upon me and yourselves. But the guest we got on today likes to call himself a climate realist, and is basically saying that climate change is a bunch of lies. Not so much climate, he says that's real, but this narrative that we have to protect our environment. I'm not an expert on this myself, so I'm going to let this man jump in on this one. I'm really excited to introduce Mr. Paul Burgess.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I mean, it's an opportunity for me to give my views to the world, as it were. So I welcome any opportunity. I don't make any money out of this. I simply, I'm 79 now, so I simply try to get the truth out there. Well, I'm a great believer in his truth.
Yes.
And I think we're in trouble in some ways in the world where people try to suppress truth. And so I've suffered from that tremendously. So people, for example, don't debate me. They just do not debate me, no matter how. So many people have come around me, we can organise a debate. And they try to, and they can't. It fails. So
would you say that's from people refusing to speak to you?
They won't. It isn't just me. They don't go in for, they don't debate on the other side with anyone with knowledge. And the reason is they're wrong. It's as simple as that. I can understand why they don't debate, because they haven't got a case to answer, actually. Yeah, it's really, that simple.
Well, it's really interesting you say that, because this is something that is believed by the mainstream. This is the mainstream narrative. Climate change is real. Mm-hmm. And before looking into stuff on YouTube and the internet, I'd probably say the same thing.
Yeah.
But you're not any old Tom, Dick and Harry. You are a very interesting character. You've lived a life. Maybe give us just a run through for the people, just so they know that we're not just speaking to some random person.
I don't think, as I say, I don't try to be I use myself as an appeal to authority. I've got a bachelor's. I've got bachelor's. I've got a master's of science in water resources technology. I was water resource engineer for Cornwall, then I was water resource engineer for Gwynedd, North Wales, and for the whole of Wales. And I was in my 20s, by the way, when I came there. So I've got a career, and my work involved what we call hydroclimatology. So I had to look into climates. I had to forecast what's a 1 in 1,000 year flood. What pattern of droughts can we expect? So climate, from a practical point of view, looking in at hydroclimatology. And I was the first, I think, in the world to discover, doing that work, I discovered the sun cycle in river flows, in rain-fed river flows. Now, rain-fed rivers are ones without springs, basically. So what they are is just a delayed reaction to the rain, yeah? And so a very clear cycle uncovered. So my interest goes back to 1971 when I did that work as a young engineer. And so that was my first baptism into climate work. And I used all sorts of highfalutin scientific things then to do things, yes. I think I was the highest paid in the British water industry for my age, at one time. And I gave it in and went into business, because what I found is when you're working for a public authority, and I mean this in any public authority, it gears itself to itself, not to its customer, not to the people. There's no exception to that, by the way, in my view. And I actually resigned right at I sat on government quangos. I even ended up closing down government committees, because I was on one committee, which the whole of the British water industry, I represented Wales. And they were talking about a system, a computer system in the 1970s that was going to take 2 years to write. It was going to cost then $250,000. And I just couldn't take it, so we went away, wrote it in 10 weeks for 10,000 quid cost. And then we ended up selling it to everybody. We sold it, I think, to Canada, Sweden, and we sold it right throughout the British Isles, as it were, to all the different authorities. And so I do things like that. But, it doesn't matter who I am. It doesn't matter a jot, my qualifications. Yeah? No, it doesn't matter even that I've done the climate, the hydroclimatology. That does not matter. All that, because that is just appealing to my authority. And that doesn't work, because there are 3 rules in science, and this applies to all science. I wish every kid could be taught this. One is appeals to authority. So you say, this professor is right to the top. He's a Nobel Prize winner. Yes, he's a Nobel Prize winner, and he's on my side. That's called an appeal to authority. In science, it means nothing. I can show you something now. I'll show you a clip of a Nobel Prize winner who's on my side. Yeah? Let me show you that, okay?
Yeah, go ahead.
Dr. John Clauser is one of the most respected scientists in the world. In 2022, he was awarded the Nobel Prize for Physics.
Yes, I assert that there is no connection whatsoever between CO2 and climate change. That's all a crock of crap, in my opinion.
Right, very quick and simple. He called it a crock of crap. So I could start my talks, and I do with that. And then I say it means nothing. That's not evidence. Science is only about evidence. So an appeal to authority, and this is what every child in school should be taught, is not science. Otherwise you end up, my God's better than your God. You get nowhere. The second thing is consensus, yes? And you'll often hear 97%. That 97% one, by the way, when you analyse it, is only 0.3%, because I'd have been included in 97. And then there's another one that says 99%. Consensus doesn't mean a thing. And there's a famous saying, which I'd like to show you, by a famous person on consensus in science, right? So this is the second point, okay? An appeal to authority is where someone puts forward an argument and invokes some entity's conclusion, relying on its authoritative position or status to support it, rather than providing their own reasoning or evidence. It's your own reasoning or evidence. This is very much my philosophy, and my approach is very much the common man approach. So it doesn't matter. When I ran a business, it didn't matter whether the lady who cleaned the toilets came up with an idea or another director. It doesn't matter. What matters is what they say. What matters is what you do. What matters what evidence you give. So that's an appeal to authority. On consensus. Historically, the claim of consensus has been the first refuge of scoundrels. It is a way to avoid debate by claiming the matter's already settled. Whenever you hear that consensus of scientists agrees on something or other, reach for your wallet because you're being had. The work of science has nothing whatever to do with consensus. Consensus is the business of politics. Right? So those are 2 fundamental parts of my philosophy totally, and they're right. And the third one is evidence. And I'd like to do another quote on evidence. It's no matter how smart you are, no matter how clever you are, no matter how many degrees you've got, if your work doesn't agree with observation, with the world, when you check it against the world, you're wrong, it's right. Right? And so in science, evidence is everything. But checking against, to get that evidence is key. Right? I'll give you examples. I'll name a chap, which now links all this together, okay? And I won't name the chap till the end, but he was an office clerk. And he came up, he had a hobby in science. So he came up with a theory. And the theory was so outlandish, well, no one had ever dreamt of this, yeah. And this is going back now to the early 1900s, yeah? And he came up with a theory, and the theory was opposed by the 100 top scientists. In fact, the world went against him. The whole scientific community said he's nuts. Yeah, they wrote a book against him. They even had 100 sign a letter in the newspapers and say, he's wrong, bang. And his answer was, why'd you do that? You only need one of you to prove me wrong. Just one of you. Yeah, He was an office clerk. Do you know what his name was? Einstein. Okay? So that's my point. And so when people ask, like you do, and everyone does, my qualifications, yes, I am qualified. I have worked in this. It's irrelevant. Yeah? Because the common man can come up, if you like, a person without any qualifications can come up with a good idea. And they have done. Okay? And so you have to discard all that. And I was invited in the Isle of Man. Well, I thought we were going to be invited. I came to do talks in the Isle of Man. And I was planned to be in a school. And the school wanted me there, but they were stopped. And the day after my talk was stopped, the government came to give the total ridiculous claims to the kids. And the point is, of course, that if I was talking by myself in a school, I'd spend all the time on what science is. I wouldn't want to give them my views, right? Because that's more important. But if I'm debating, then fine, I can give my views, yet they can see both sides. So this openness and this knowing that all that matters is evidence is key. So when you hear, when you see it all the time on television, people appeal. You had the doctor who came up with the real trouble with stomach ulcers, what caused them. And he died in poverty and everything. He was ridiculed, but he was right. Yes? And they were operating all the wrong ways on stomachs because they didn't understand what caused stomach ulcers. So science is riddled with it. Riddled with it. The journal, the medical journal in Britain, the editor of that stated that 50% of the scientific papers in his journal are wrong. That's normal. Yes. So that I've started off with that because it's really a reaction to you asking my qualifications.
It was a great reaction. It's a great answer.
Thank you.
Well, yeah, I think it's sad really because in this world, that's all that holds weight, isn't it, really, is that appeal to authority.
Appeal, yeah. And you'll see it all the time. You'll see, well, this expert says this and this expert. Now, we lost a bit of the faith in that recently with the COVID thing, didn't we?
Yeah.
And that's good in a way. They're losing of faith. And you've really got to understand and apply. And if I could get one message across to the kids, because they're the most important people, it's that. And for them to examine it that way, right? Why did they ban me from a school, And I almost arranged with one school, actually, until one school was going to do it with me. And then they heard that I made the documentary on Tommy Robinson. And so they wouldn't have me because I made a documentary. If I'd have made a documentary on the Taliban, I'd have been okay.
Well, that's another whole beast. We can touch about that later because there is, I've had it myself and it just does not make any sense to me. No. Something famous that Nigel Farage said the other day was, if you post on social media or make a video slandering a paedophile, you'll get arrested. But the paedophile won't get arrested.
Correct. I did, I gave some talks on 15-minute cities, which are obviously totally opposed to. And the first talk I gave was outside Oxford University. And there were about 8 to 10,000 people turned up, but the speakers could only reach 2,000 or 3,000. And I only had a 10-minute spot with many other speakers. And that was my first introduction. The second, that's when I met Lawrence Fox, actually. And then the second thing was in Swansea. And there was a little amphitheatre thing in the middle of Swansea. I was sitting by myself waiting to meet the people. And the bloke next to me started chatting and realised I was going to be giving a talk. I ended up with Antifa all around me, surrounding me. And I wasn't the slightest bit scared. They were shouting Nazi, Nazi, Nazi at me. This is for my views on climate change. And the police intervened. The police came and stood between because they were there ready to come a demo. And the next one was Swindon, where in the middle of the shopping centre, we had a table and things. I was giving a talk on the 10-minute city. And a bloke walked up, picked up the whole trestle table full of stuff and threw it. Yes? And I went to the police, spent an hour and a half with the police, as did another lady. And we got him prosecuted stop oil. And he was the one who painted, the first one who painted the paintings in London, in the Art Gallery. And
which is absolutely disgusting.
10 minutes, he got 10 months suspended sentence, a criminal record, and a fine. Yeah. So, but I'm quite pleased about that. The next time was on with Stop Oil, where I thought I'd have a debate because I'm on GB News recently, a reasonable amount. So I was invited on the Nano Coda show to oppose Stop Oil, just the two of us. Great, because when there's four of you in limited time, you get very limited arguments. And all I did was produce a piece of paper from the IPCC. Now, the IPCC is the UN God on climate alarmism, yeah? But they state very clearly that there's no man-made influence yet been detected in floods, in droughts, and blah, blah, blah. The only thing they claim is temperature, basically. So I produced a piece of paper, handed it over to him, and without looking, he screwed it up and threw it away. And that's the level of debate.
Well, they don't want to look at it, do they? And it's the same in any debate. I find my observation as someone who, like, people would say that I sit on the right. I don't believe I sit on the right. I believe I sit in the middle. But because I have guests on here from the right, I'm from the right. You know, I've had many from the left. But from being someone sitting from afar, I believe I don't have any political views. That is my observation. The left just shout and do not.
That's right.
Give forward any evidence.
Like even left and right. What would I call myself? Because
well, you're a far right Nazi, by the way. Just to let you know.
A far right what?
You're a Nazi.
What's that?
You're a Nazi.
Oh, Nazi.
You'd be a far right Nazi.
Yeah, I know and call that. Yeah, but I was. By the way, when I came to the Isle of Man, the morning I was on the radio for an hour with a TV, thing. Yeah, I was on the radio for an hour. And the lady opposite me was in the Green Party. I thought this is great. She spent the whole hour insulting me, calling me far right, and that I shouldn't be allowed to speak, and it shouldn't be on the island, it shouldn't be allowed on the island. And that's what they do.
Well, that's fascism, isn't it? Like,
it is, yes. It's the exact opposite, yes. But in actual fact, I don't like the term left-right because it's more three-dimensional than that. And left-right is tribal. And I don't like being put in a tribe. I don't belong to any political party, right? I vote. I don't lose a vote. I'll vote for the nearest party to my views, right? But for example, I'm right-wing on economics. I believe in the free market, yeah, but it has to have controls on it, yeah. I believe I'm totally opposed to capital punishment, that doesn't make me far right, I suppose. And all my life I've been opposed to that. And the simple reason is this: if you accept capital punishment, you accept sometimes you're going to be hanging the wrong innocent person. And if I'm willing to stand there and say, okay, I'll hang for the sake of every guilty one to hang, I wouldn't do that. And I don't expect anyone. So I don't believe in the perfect system, and therefore I don't believe in the perfect punishment, which is death, right? Now, you can argue that forever, but that is not what people think is a far-right thing. So you can have, and I was born in poverty. I was born in a 3-bedroom terrace house with 5 families in it, with children. And so I didn't know about the rest of the world as a child. I didn't even know. Even when I was 16, even though I ended up at university, I didn't know what a university was. I just had no background around me to do that. But I was paid by the government to go to university and to do my master's as well, when I did my master's, Master of Science. And I believe in social mobility. It's very important. So I believe equal opportunity and making sure children have opportunity is a really big part of me, because I'm a function of it, yes? I'm a result of it. I'm a child of that. And so does that sound far right? No. And so, you see, you've got these 3-dimensional things in real life that you haven't got when you say, I belong to the left or the right.
But on what grounds do you think people have? Like, what is their perception and what is their reasoning for calling someone far right, for questioning climate change?
Well, it does tend to be, having said I don't like doing the tribes, it does tend to be left go more for the climate alarmism, the right don't. That's almost wrong, because again, it's not attributing it to evidence, yes? But the truth is that with climate alarmism comes control of everyone's lives in every aspect. I mean, you only have to look at the WEF and what they propose, reduce the population down to 500 million from 8 billion, etc. Because, I mean, we're breathing out in the studio now. You're breathing out CO2. Now, the CO2 in the atmosphere is around about 420-ish, parts per million. Do you know what you're breathing out? Does a cameraman know what he's breathing out? The answer is 40,000 parts per million. So it's 420 in the atmosphere. And in this room with three of us, I do have a CO2 meter I bring sometime. I haven't brought it today, but it'd be about 2,000 already. And very often at the end of a talk, I'll look at 3, 4, 5,000. And so on. Because CO2 is a fundamental part of our lives. We're made of it. About 20% of your body is carbon. We're made of it. We need it for life. The old adage about an old lady talking to her plants make them grow better is true, because she's breathing out at 40,000 parts per million, and it's plant food. CO2 is plant food. Most of our plants evolved in CO2 levels 2 or 3 times, over 1,000, 2,000 parts per million. Right? That's why we pump CO2 into greenhouses, to make them grow better. And I'll give you some simple facts, and these are absolute facts, which you can go to our world of data on the computer. Anyone can do this. Record rice crops today. Record in history. Record cereal crops today. Record in history, etc. And the reason is we're improving the CO2 level. Yes? And so the more CO2, and that's my badge, more CO2, I love CO2, more CO2 the better. And yet we're being told it's like a pollutant and so on, which is totally absurd. And the science isn't there behind it either.
Yeah, it's just, do you think climate change came about by some genuine scientists that just got it wrong, or do you think there's more of a sinister level?
I'm afraid there is sinister. Let's go into the history of it.
Okay.
It's sinister. And
Right.
if you go into the history of the alarmism, it really started off with Greta Thunberg's great-grandfather.
Oh, that's very interesting, isn't
Oh,
it?
yeah, her family comes from that.
Makes sense now.
Sorry?
It makes sense now.
That's right. And that's just before 1900, 1890-something. He came up with CO2, I think. But it didn't get going until, don't forget, around about 1840, we had the Thames freezing over. We had what we call the Little Ice Age. We had extreme famines. We had a lot of extreme weather. We had the biggest droughts ever in our history. We had the biggest floods ever in our history in the past. Not today. It's got less and less. And so around about 1970, they started the Ice Age coming scare. So in the 70s, they made films of it, documentaries, whole-hour documentaries. Dr. Spock from Star Trek was actually doing one, yeah? And look what's coming, the Ice Age coming. So that was one climate scare, yes? A group of scientists had a conference and then wrote a letter to President Nixon to say, look, we should coat the Arctic in coal dust to absorb more heat and melt it. Right? That's how bad it was in the 1970s. So that was climate alarmism.
And it's like around the same time where, the nuclear threat was massive and, the satanic panic. Or all around those times in the 70s, there was a lot of alarm with a lot of things by the sound of it.
So, but then it started to warm about the end of the 1970s, beginning of the 80s. We started to warm. And we warmed until just 2002, 2005, and more or less stopped it since, really. I know people argue with that, but more or less. But I want to, again, come down to the common man sense here. When it's very cold, we have no boom in civilization. So if you go historically, the medieval warm period is a boom in civilizations. The Dark Ages when it's cold. The previous time was the Roman warm period when we had warmth again, right? The Romans left because it got too cold, right? So in actual fact, all the big movements in civilization have been the warm periods when there was enough food then and so on. Now, question. Do you want to go back to 1850? Because if CO2 by man, which has risen, there's no doubt about that, if CO2 has risen by man and we put a lot into the atmosphere, we've gone from about 280 roughly to about 420. So we put about 140 or so into the atmosphere. Hold on. Do we want to, if what they say is that's caused by man, a part of it is. part of the increase in temperature is not much, but naturally it would happen anyway, because we had warms and colds and warms and colds. Now I'll come back to the question: is it sinister or not? In the 1990s, when the IPCC, they're the global authority from the UN, the International Government Panel on Climate Change, and they actually had the 1930s were warmer than today. They had the medieval warm period. All of that was okay. Until a thing came along, and this is where it gets sinister, called the hockey stick. And it was a graph that went like this and up and said, look what we're doing to the temperature. Yeah? And the graph was taken, a 1,000-year graph it was, over 1,000 years. And they took tree rings, that the tree rings grow faster when it's warmer and they grow slower when it's colder. Yeah? So we can monitor the temperature by what we call in science a proxy. Yeah? And the hockey stick. And there were 3 people involved in it. There was a Dr. Mann he wasn't a doctor then. I don't think he was a doctor then. It was a man, a young graduate in effect, from America. There was a briefer in the UK, and there was the one of the university centres of the East Anglian University, a centre of alarmism. 3 people. And so they plotted it all. They all did their own work. And then it got to the 1960s when we started to put CO2 in properly, by the way. We didn't put a lot in until then. And the temperatures went down, but we monitored the temperatures going up. Right? So hold on here. The trees are showing the temperatures coming down, Briffa said. My man said, no, mine are going up. Well, in science, what you do then is you check your method. If your method now has proven observation, has proven wrong, it doesn't work, you have to chuck your method. Do you know what they did? They deleted delete the decline. They deleted the decline and added on the real temperatures. So up to that point, it was the proxy temperatures, then they added on the real. That in science is called cheating. And there's a thing called ClimateGate, where someone let out all the emails on this, and I've featured it. I've got a video about hockey stick, which explains all this to everybody.
Just so you said the one was in decline, the one was on the rise. Were they identical? One decline, one rise.
Sorry?
Were they identical? So was the one going up and the one going down? Like, was it like a mirror?
One went down, one went up. They went like a mirror image.
Would either way of that, though, would they still be a sign of climate change?
No,
because one's extreme.
There is climate
They're both
change.
extreme.
The real climate change deniers are the climate alarmists, because there's always been climate change and there will always be climate change. And we've got cycles. We know about the cycles. Yeah. And I can give you forecasts today based on the cycles. I can give you information. I mean, this year there's been headlines, why is the Atlantic cooling? I've been making videos why it should be cooling. Anyway, for example, the whole of the North Atlantic from the tropics to the Arctic cools and warms on a 70-year cycle, which we know about.
Being Wales's biggest podcast means only one thing. We need to be sponsored by Wales's biggest clothing brand, Weekend Offender. They've been in the game for well over a decade now, and they still hold weight within the casual scene. If you want a deal on the hottest seasonal drops, then hit the discount code below at Stay Central. Okay, so you can use a proxy.
Yeah, you can. You can use, or you can use proxies, but you've got to have it right.
Yeah.
So if the proxies you're using don't work, you drop them.
Okay.
So I'll tell you why tree rings don't work. The growth of a tree ring depends on much more than just the temperature. It depends on the nutrition. It depends on rain. It depends on a number of factors, right? So it's not a great proxy.
Yeah.
There are better proxies. And, one proxy, for example, is what we call stomata. Now, you've got to imagine this. We have been in, or are still in, a CO2 drought. So the plants who grew up, evolved with, let's say, 1,500 parts per million Well, we're looking at, now today, even looking at 420-ish. Yes?
Yeah.
So 420 parts per million, and we're gasping. It's like, I need more. So the stomata are little holes to breathe in the CO2. So they open up more. So the number of stomata is an indicator of the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere. So that's another proxy. You with me?
Yeah.
So there are different proxies, and there's carbon dating is a proxy, and so on. So there's some very good proxies and some not so good proxies. But what you don't do in science is fiddle the result to give you what you want. And that is the whole basis of climate alarmism as we know it today. And it's Dr. Mann with his hockey stick, and that was adopted by the IPCC, and then Obama went wild with it, yes, and gave birth to this extreme alarmism. With it, with climate alarmism, which is totally not true, right? And there, the climate change deniers, because I say the climate does change, and I would ask them a question. What do you want to go back to? Are we better off? I'll get a good idea. I've got a cure. Let's accept your alarmism. I've got a magic way I can reduce the CO2 and take us back to the little ice age. Is that what you want? Is that really what you want? The famines, the totally cold, you can walk over the Thames. Yeah, is that what you want? Because you don't want that. The gain in temperature about 1.3, 1.4 degrees since the little ice age, since 1850, has been hugely beneficial to us. Hugely. We could do with some more warmth now.
Yeah.
I'm serious.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Well, the one thing is, which I've heard is the summers are going to get hotter and the winters are going to get colder, but I haven't seen it.
No, there are changes, but on GB News, I was a lot against Jim Dale, who's a meteorologist who doesn't understand anything, actually. He really doesn't. No, it's zero. I've got no respect for him.
I have seen some of the debates.
Yeah. Okay.
Is he one of the gentlemen who actually wants to lock people up like yourself?
Yes, he actually went round. He did all the studios. You see, he only allowed on the one, which is GB News Nanarakoa, apparently. And all the rest, he gets 5-10 times the appearances I get. So he's on all the time.
Well, you did used to be able to go on people like LBC and...
Not about climate.
Oh, that was about something else?
No, it's politics.
Okay.
And I played it very carefully. I left them because when I went to mention climate for the first time, Matt Stadlin, it was quite funny because I sat in a green room with him recently on GB News. But Matt Stadlin said, that's disgusting. You shouldn't be allowed to say things like this, etc. And this is a journalist who doesn't know the first thing about the subject. Yeah. Not the first thing. And I just gave in then. I was so prevalent on GB News that I was actually asked, there was a debate coming up. So you meant to phone in and get on. And they cheated a bit. So they phoned me up and said, we'll phone you. We want you to be on to question the health secretary. Health.
Yeah, I've had that. But the thing is, I've had BBC and other stations call me, will you come on, please? And then when I come on, they make out like I've called them.
Yeah. I know.
We got someone on the phone.
Anyway,
you've just phoned me, you weirdo.
But Jim Dale then went round all the stations, Sky, BBC, all of them, saying people like me should be jailed. Basically, should be made criminal.
Here's a question I want to ask you: would you be better off in life, and would you be more comfortable and have more work if you went along with the status quo of climate change?
I don't do work. I don't get paid for anything. I don't I pay out. I mean, even today.
But what I'm saying is, you just said I'm not even allowed on any of these other radio stations. It's not benefited you as much going with this agenda.
Don't benefit me personally at all.
Yeah,
it's negative.
It's making me. Yeah.
Number one, it costs me money.
Yeah,
right. I don't get any support financially at all. Right. I sometimes, if I'm going to drive hundreds of miles for a talk and spend the night in a hotel, I try to ask for expenses. If they can't afford it, very often I don't. Right. And so I'm down thousands of pounds a year on what I do. Quite funny because Jim Dale's going on about me when he first met me, except it wasn't true after a while, paid by big oil and all this nonsense. I wish I was. I'm still be waiting for the check, So I don't gain from this. What I'm doing this for is the truth, and above all for children. Yeah. Because you've got to understand, this alarmism started about seriously about 24 years ago. So someone who was 24 years ago is now 9. The entire education system is geared against them, is geared to brainwash them. And I feel so strongly about our children being brainwashed. And so, but it's all going to collapse anyway. I mean, net zero is going to collapse anyway. It can't work. I released a video yesterday with one of the aspects that can't work, the storage part. But it doesn't work. And I want to say something else. It's so simple. Now, everyone should be able to understand the next subject. Yes? Here is a graph. And the graph here is of the CO2 growth from the alarmists, which we all agree with. So there's no dispute about that shape of that graph. The little zigzags are the CO2 changing in the northern hemisphere from winter to summer. Okay?
Okay, yeah.
Because that changes the amount of CO2. Because in the summer, the trees suck in the CO2 and the plants, right? And when they fall and die, things give it off. So one gives it off and one sucks it in. So in the summer, it goes down. In the winter, it goes up. Now, that growth has got all the conferences on climate, all the big COP meetings they have where they fly in with all the jets, all of those plotted on it. They make no difference to the rise. So what we're doing makes no difference at all to the rise of CO2. So any sacrifice, all the costs we're doing now, hundreds of billions, all the work we're doing now, make no difference whatsoever to the growth of CO2. Right? So that's a very simple graph that everyone can understand. Right?
What? Going back to what you've said about the sinister agenda, what is the sinister agenda?
It's control. If you control CO2, you control your food. Look at it. We've got insects being put into meals in children's schools in Wales, right? It controls your food.
Is that a fact?
I think so, yes. I mean, Mark Drakeford was very keen on it, right? They mince up some of the protein, mince up insects, which are protein, and feed them into the food system. And meat. Yeah, you'll be rationed on meat. You'll be rationed.
I have heard this as a conversation with.
So it's every single aspect of your life will be controlled. Whether you go on a holiday or not, whether you get a ration ticket to go on holiday, so many air miles allowed, every 3 years or whatever. All that is coming. All of that. The 15-minute city. Let's look at the 15-minute city. You take a circle like a pie, and you divide it like a pie. So you're in a sector now, right?
Yeah.
You can't travel from that sector into the next sector. You have to go to the outside and go round. There was a grandmother in Oxford when I gave the talk on the 15-minute city, a grandmother who now would drive and be there in 10 minutes to pick her grandchild up from home and take the grandchild to school and back home. It would take her 10 or 15 minutes. Yeah? Under the new system, she'd have to leave her sector, drive on the outside circle, come back into that sector, right? And it would take 30 to 40 minutes. And that's twice a day she has to do it. So hold on. But it's worse than that. The proposal is that you're only allowed to leave your sector 100 times a year in a car. So if you are working, it includes work. So if you travel to work,
you can't work 365 days of the year.
That's right. So everything is controlled. Every single aspect. It's so extreme that I know people haven't woken up yet, but you'll hear about food, the farmers, we want less food. What they're doing to the farmers is reducing food supply. Yeah? The worst thing we could do. It goes on and on and on. So every single aspect.
Control for what? Like, is it to, like you said about the globalist agenda of depopulation?
That's right.
Is that what it is?
It is, yes. It's basically, I don't go on about it too much. I don't mention it in my videos too much, but because I just concentrate on the science and how wrong it is, and the costs.
Not the consequences.
And not the consequences. But obviously I've done the 15-minute city. I do all that.
Well, Mark Drakeford, when we interviewed Mark Drakeford and we questioned him on 15-minute cities, he tried to say, don't be so ridiculous. The reason I've done it, the reason we spoke about it was because I was once a councillor in Ely, the council estate of Cardiff, and some people don't even leave their estate. They
It's up to them.
There is so much poverty that, some people don't. It's about having everything around them, your doctors,
No, all right, yeah,
convenience.
Let me explain something about how civilization works then from this. This is how I do this. There was once a time, medieval times, where you had a village. And the village had very few skills. You had a blacksmith, maybe, yeah? You have a blacksmith. Now, he specialised in doing one thing well that the other people couldn't do. So they'd go to the blacksmith and say, you shoe my horse, or you do this, yes? And they had a baker, maybe, who could bake bread or something. And that's how it worked. Now, we evolved, and then along came fossil fuels, the most glorious thing in the world, around about the Industrial Revolution, right? And you had then let's take the mills. So you had the woolen mills, the cotton mills, all labour intensive. But now, with a steam mill, you could actually do the job of 100 people, one. That is what gave wealth. I know they're called Luddites because they opposed it, but in actual fact, that creates production and wealth. If one person can do the work of 100, that's wealth. And because of fossil fuels, that's what happened. And as we learned, and as science came in and so on, we specialised. This mic in front of me has got foam. The foam is not made by the manufacturer of the mic. They buy it in. That's a specialist job. There'll be parts inside that mic that are bought in, transducers and things, specialist job. So in actual fact, the whole of that. So when you go back to your little sector where you want everything locally, yeah, now think about this. Just ask any woman, how many women's clothes shops are you going to have in your sector? The answer is none, because there's no scale of opportunity for them, is there? You have your shopping centres to bring people in so that you can get the foot traffic. There'll be no foot traffic. There'll be no businesses. There'll be no specialisation. And where all the doctors going to come from suddenly to be in every single sector? This is total nonsense. This is pie in the sky. You could not make up. Mark Drakeford is a dangerous idiot, in my opinion, right? It's as simple as that. And that work, he couldn't stand up to any proper examination of what he's suggesting. You can't make this up.
So, has any of these things been signed off then of actually happening, given a time scale? I've heard of Agenda 2030. Does that have...
That's it.
Climate...
But basically, it's already happening. Let me give you an example. I made a video, I think I sent it to you, about the recent... Let's take the recent cut in the winter fuel allowance. 300 quid cut. Yeah, let's take...
Oh, what a shame, eh?
Yeah, so let's take that cut. Now, traditionally they've done it without selection because the cost of actually providing who deserves it or not is more costly to find out than just giving it.
Yeah.
Right. So you have to be efficient in government. I know that doesn't cross their minds. But that's how it was. So 300 quid gone. That's about roughly 1.5 billion. Right? But we're just spending that much money on a project, floating wind farms, that have just failed. Yeah, they've just failed. So we're actually spending the money. We're spending 11.1 billion on overseas green aid, on climate change for overseas countries, in Africa in particular, making it worse for them. Because basically when the wind stops and the sun doesn't shine, you've got nothing. And the only backup is gas. The only backup. You need fossil fuels. And so when you add wind farms in Britain, you've still got to have the gas. Without the gas, you've got nothing. And gas is the only thing that can cope with the demand through the day. Right? So...
defeating the object.
Pardon? Yeah, you were spending... I know Richard Tice is giving a lecture today and he's saying 30 billion a year on it. We're spending much more than that. All right, then. I'll give you examples of how it's affecting our lives. And I'll go right here to Wales. I mentioned this.
Well, you said Wales is getting raped.
Wales is getting raped. So is Britain, but Wales is getting raped. So I'll talk about that. Let's take a few 2,800 jobs for Tata Steel. Yes? We've stopped producing, taken all the skills away now. Electric furnace can only do melted scrap steel. So 2,800 jobs. It isn't 2,800 jobs because the local shop, the local baker's shop, needed that income. They supplied people who supplied that industry with parts and bits and so on needed that income. You're probably looking at a roll-on to nearer to 10,000 jobs. Yes? Gone. So now that steel, that top quality steel, not made here anymore, we have to bring it from China. Now, China pollutes, and don't forget CO2 is not a pollutant. We need it. We'd be dead without it, right? We bring it from China and ship it across oceans. And these big ships across oceans use they actually start the engines with like a normal diesel, but when they get the engine going, they use the dirty, cheap diesel. Yes. And so it comes chug all the way to Britain to drop off steel. So all we've done is export the jobs, increase the pollution in the world. Yes. And by the pollution, I mean the pollution in the sea, etc. We've increased that and so on for no point at all. So there's an immediate effect, right? But it gets worse. They're after putting, I don't even know this, but the national grid, which is the distribution system for electric, yes? It's not owned by Britain. It's a private business. It's like what we call a public business, which you can buy shares in. It's not publicly owned. It's a monopoly that's not publicly owned. And BlackRock's the biggest investor in it. So you've got that, and that's about to spend £60 billion on putting the infrastructure in to pick up all the wind farms and solar farms. That is an extra cost. Your electricity is going to go up and up and up. It's extremely expensive, and it's totally in addition to any gas.
There's no logic to it.
There's no logic at all, except if you want to control people. Now, so you either end up with, you then have to ask whether Mark Drakeford is just silly or thick. He is not intelligent enough to understand, or he sees this as control. But, I hate to use the term left, but the left tend to think of controlling people, that the society knows better than the individual. Yes? And therefore does give them the ultimate control. Climate alarmism gives them that control. Yeah.
So in the world, I'm assuming there's many countries that don't go along with this climate agenda.
Well, yeah, all the sensible countries. China doesn't. China pays homage to it. No.
So basically, there's a lot of countries benefiting and flourishing whilst we're the suckers who are...
Look at this curve again, right? This is China. China, you see, China...
Where's China at the bottom?
No, China's not there. China takes part in all the conferences and doing nothing because the CO2 rises and rises, while having no effect.
Because if the world turns, so in Britain we might stop.
China and India are building coal power stations like it's no tomorrow, right? Because it's cheap. Let me give you an example. There's a place called the Gobi Desert in China.
What are we doing?
Gobi Desert in China, and they built the world's biggest wind farms. So people say, look, China's embracing this, yes? But the energy is not being used. Why? Because the cost of the wind is 4 times the cost of coal. So the local area is a big coal mining area. And they don't want to put themselves out of work. And they don't want to increase their cost 4 times. So it's not being used.
And I think another question that comes into this about, we've got to think of the future. We've got to think about our kids' future. Yeah?
So do
These
I.
people who are preaching this are the same people who are going to war everywhere. And, the last thing we need to worry about is climate change in 150 years. We might not be here in 4 years with the way the countries are going on. The same people preaching this.
Oh, I can get into that, but you're going to branch off into the politics.
But it is true.
Yes and no. I believe we should support Ukraine, right? So I very firmly believe that. I very firmly believe we should support Israel, right? I believe if someone came into my home and did to my children, what babies and things, what was done to the Jews in Israel. And then they had those people say, we'll never stop trying to kill you all, because they do declare that, Hamas, yes? Then you've got no choice but to stop them. You've got no choice. And you could argue the recent thing that's happened with Israel, blowing up the walkie-talkies and the pagers, was actually at least targeted. And it did get...
Well, they did call it terrorism, but my understanding of terrorism is attacking innocent people.
No.
And Hezbollah are a terrorist organisation. So.
And what they did there was the most selective takeout of those people. Now, they're going to have some collateral damage with that, but less collateral damage by a mile than sending a missile into a building. Yes? So that's actually it's the narrowest targeted thing, you can get. But the reason I don't go into politics is because of this. You get into all sorts of areas, and then you get into, and that's why I won't belong to a party. I support certain parties, and I've been quite open recently, just for the first time. I voted Reform, and I would support Reform because that's the nearest party and the only party that says we'll drop net zero. That stands a chance. There are a few other parties, but they're so insignificant. Yeah, we've got a chance of dropping net zero. And I know Richard Tice today, I heard it on the radio here, is going to be talking about net zero.
So in your ideal world, would you like to see Tata Steel back open? Would you like to see coal mines across the valleys open?
Yes, I mean, we can treat, I'm against pollution. Now, even as a kid of 11, and I was in poverty,
I hate pollution.
Pardon?
I hate pollution as well.
Yeah. So as a kid, I belonged to an organisation that, and I gave some of my pocket money to it because I was that serious, to stop river pollution.
Oh.
Right. And I was when I was in charge of water resource planning in Wales, I was also in charge of all technical data, sewage, everything. And so a sewage report would come in, a pollution report would come in to say this river's been polluted. Then I'd have to give it to the right department and so. And Lord Brecon, who was the chairman, used to come round in a good way, and he'd walk into anyone's office, pick up a piece of paper and say, "What's this, sir?" And he picked it up, "Pollution report, sir." And he said, "What happens to that?" I said, "It goes to so-and-so, and then nothing happens." He said, "Why? Why aren't we doing something about the polluter?" And I said, "Because we're the biggest polluter, right? It's us. It's our sewage." And then another thing happened. I was contacted by the Anti-Coastal Pollution League, and they put a map of Wales coast, and they had 3 or 4 raw sewage outlets. And they say, "Are these all true?" So I wrote back and said, "They're true, but there's another 8 or so here." So I added, because as a public servant, I couldn't do anything other than be honest and open, right? I was heavily criticised for that. Heavily. How dare you give them that information? And I said, the truth is, unless we recognise the problem, which has been hitting us in the last few years, by the way, unless we recognise...
Ogmore was polluted the other week.
Right. Unless we understand the nature of the problem, what we're doing, we'll never get the funds to do anything. So openness...
Well, what could we be doing rather than polluting the coastal loads? What's the other alternative? There is none really, is there?
The Victorians did a huge programme of sewage, and we're still living off most of that, by the way.
The waterworks and stuff, isn't it?
Well, the sewage treatments and so on. And the sewers, the actual sewers. Because don't forget, the first sewer in Britain was in London. And London was terrible. I mean, you'd die if you fell in the Thames, you know. It was shit, you know. And what happened was they built the sewer that moved it further down. There's a tremendous Channel 4 documentary, I think it is, called The Great Stink, which it really doesn't sound interesting. It's fascinating. Because as they moved it down and cleaned up the river, the people downriver say, "Oh, hold it there." And the whole thing started to expand. They put sewage tunnels, you know, proper sewers in, and so on. But we need treatment. And therefore, the people say, "Oh, private industry at the moment," the water people. And I've got no time for a lot of them, believe me. And I prefer to have in private hands with controls, but because management's better normally. But it's not their fault, because it is in the case of the Thames one, because they took all the money out and didn't put it in. But when they set up, when I worked in the public side, and I actually resigned, and I resigned on the issue of water metering in Wales, because in Wales, a friend of mine said, "It's terrible. We got all this water going to Birmingham, and it's Welsh water, and blah blah blah, and it's cheaper for them than it is for us." And I said, the reason is, in Wales, you'll go 10 miles and you get 20 houses. In Birmingham, you go 100 yards, you get 20 terraces. You know, the density of population makes it much cheaper to distribute water. I understand how he said, you know. So it's things like this that, and so I resigned because there's enough water.
Well, there was a big uproar, wasn't there, when the village that got flooded to feed Liverpool the water.
Well, that's true. A village. They this is going back in time.
Yeah.
When you built a reservoir, there was a small village there, and they built the reservoir, and the reservoir was supplying Liverpool.
So under that reservoir are houses, which is fascinating to me.
Yeah, no. Well, you have to. I mean, we're raging onto all sorts of wide subjects here.
Yeah.
But you
that's what we do here on the Central Club.
okay, fine. But we had to you either have reservoirs and you don't, and you have to balance things. But don't forget, Wales gets a tremendous subsidy for that. And I was on the Craiggoch committee, which is going to be the biggest dam in Europe at the time, in the 1970s. And I represented Wales and Severn Trent. It was going to go to Birmingham, the water. And I looked at it and said, there's no need for this. There's just no need to build it, right? Looking at the demand forecast. And I got criticised for that because my director wanted a knighthood out of it. So, because that's what it's about in public
Status.
That's right. And of course, they spent another 10 or 20 million back then, and it collapsed because there's no need for it. So in the end, when the water metering came along, I used to be on your council rates. So you just have water so much. It used to be like a charge on your council rates. So it was already being collected, yes? But when you put water metering in, you've got to have every bit metered. So you've got thousands, tens of thousands of meters. You've got staff. You've got computer systems. You've got a whole bureaucracy. And it wasn't worth it. It just wasn't worth it. And the only time you need to meter in economic terms from the water resource industry is, say you're going to come up to, once you build a big dam and it costs you 10 billion and it lasts you 100 years, when you're coming up to the demand at the end of that, you want to avoid building another one. That's the time to start stopping the wastewater, the leaks. That's the time to start rationing, as it were, by metering. But there was no sign of that in Wales. But there was an empire. And I sat at a meeting there that said, we'll need a staff of 12 to handle the whole of Wales. Well, that wouldn't be enough to even handle the phone calls. And I said, I can't take this anymore. I'd built up a little business, so I resigned.
Oh, interesting. That is really fascinating, isn't it? Like, you know, so how many reservoirs? Is there lots of reservoirs in Wales, would you say?
What do you mean? What, I don't understand the question.
Is there lots of reservoirs in Wales?
Lots. Because it gets a lot of rainfall, because we have southwesterly winds going into the UK, yeah? And it meets the mountains, the hills of Wales, and drops the water.
Yeah.
And so we have more reservoirs in Wales, yes, a lot.
Wow.
I mean, if you go up to Brecon from Cardiff, you'll pass 3 on the way.
Yeah, by Story Arms, yeah.
That's right.
The wildfires, for example.
Okay, then.
Let's look at the wildfires.
Okay, let me show you a graph.
Cuff, okay.
Okay. In fact, I know you have to edit.
Well, we interviewed a guy who thinks that the wildfires in Hawaii were direct energy weapons.
Well, this is the second. I've got a section here on extreme weather, yeah?
Okay.
Let's go to, I'll go to temperature, floods, the lot. Temperature, floods, and the lot, right? This last May, we were told it's the hottest May on record. We were told, these hot Mays, terrible, climate change. So if you look at the longest temperature record in the world, it's the Central England temperature record. And on this graph, May 1883 was the hottest. There's the Mays.
What a summer that would have been.
Yes, that would have been a lovely summer, right? That's temperature. So I'm quickly whipping through what you call extreme weather. Yeah?
Which is now far less than it's ever been.
Right. Just as a matter of record, Hadcrut is the temperature record from the UK, and it's actually cooled between 2016 and 2022. Not like you believe that from the head.
Huge, significant drop, really. You can see the spike there.
Yeah.
And that, if you take the 16 coldest years after 1998, no global warming for 18 years and 6 months since 1998. I could go on, and my videos are going into detail. These are UK major drought events. I'll talk you through. You'll be showing the video. 1765 to 1768 was the worst drought ever we've had. 1798 was the next one, 1854, 1887, 1890, 1921, 19... This is
But that one went for 9 years. Wow.
Pardon?
That drought went for 9 years.
Yeah, it was a period, yeah. You get different types of
So,
suns.
so that were there 95 to 97. Are you saying there was no rain during that time?
No, I'm saying it's low rain. It was a
Low rain, yeah.
The worst droughts, the point here is the worst droughts were in the past. The worst floods were in the past, right? The worst fires were in the past. But people fiddle the data as well. Now, that is agreed with the Environment Agency. I mean, so what I'm showing you are official records, right? I'm not showing you my records. I'm showing you official records. But you started off with fires, and that is political fiddling I'm now going to show you.
It's just like rainfall. We've actually increased rainfall average since 1850, but at the same time we've reduced the extremes. So we don't get the big droughts of the 1800s, nor do we get the big floods of the 1800s. The range has become less. We have less extreme weather.
The truth about the fires and what you're going to have now on forest fires, which is the subject you raised.
Well, yeah, like I've heard a lot of stuff about wildfires. A lot of it quite concerning. A lot of people would call me a conspiracy theorist for this. But yeah, let's hear your take.
Well, looking at this graph and how forest fires are growing, maybe one should be concerned. Well, be concerned until you realise, and you go back in time with this graph, that what we're suffering now from is nothing compared to the past, as you can see. But more important, when President Biden came into power, he had all this part of the graph deleted from the official records. This is intentional hiding of the historic data.
Just showing us the last 10 years rather than
Just showing us, they cheat. That is political cheating to suppress data.
But the thing that's really interesting is when they are forecasting and when they're predicting, they're not just giving us the next 10 years, are they? They're giving us 100 years. So
yeah, because
you
you won't
should
be
going
around.
back.
They won't be around. Yeah, they won't be around to be accountable for it.
Yeah. No, but they only want to show you the past 10 years, but they want to predict something that's happening in 100 years.
Yeah.
Well, if you're predicting something from 100 years ago, you need to go back to the data 100 years ago.
You need. Well, actually, it's a very important point you've just raised in science. What it is cycles. Now, if you take, let's say there are cycles in the climate. Some of them, the biggest cycle that we know about is 100,000 years. And that's because the Earth changes its distance from the sun. It's elliptical. It's not round. It's elliptical. Right? And by the way, the Earth does not orbit the sun. And I'll prove that in a minute. It actually orbits a place in space outside the sun because the planets pull the sun. As well as, if you have two stars equal, they'll revolve around a centre point. If one's bigger than the other, it'll move that centre point nearer to the bigger one. So that all the planets pull on the sun. And so there's a place called the barycenter just outside the sun that we actually orbit. Right?
We don't orbit the sun.
No,
the sun doesn't orbit us.
No, we don't orbit the sun. We don't go on orbit around the centre of around the sun. We go on orbit around a point in space called the barycenter.
That's mad. Is that like a proven thing as well?
Oh yeah, no, this is not disputed. This is just simple science.
Yes.
Well, if I have a P here, there's the sun, that size. If I have a P here, then the gravitational it's really going to revolve around that. If I have this bigger here, it's not, because I'm pulling on that as well as it pulling on me. If they're both equal size, it'll be the middle. So the two stars would orbit around the middle. The bigger it is, the nearer you move. So we orbit about a space outside the sun. That's not disputed. I've just given you a little scientific nutmeg, as it were. That's not disputed.
But I thought, that's what they teach you in school, isn't it? Or no?
Yeah, we will simplify. In some
things, I would say we orbit the sun. It's easier. I just thought I'd explain that as we go. But understanding all of this, in my talks I go through all the extreme weather, and in all my videos I go through them, and I give you the facts, right? Now, one of the biggest, look, what controls the temperature on Earth? What controls the weather more than anything else? By a mile, not even tiny, by a mile, oceans. The oceans contain more than 1,000 times the heat, more than 1,000 times the heat of the atmosphere. And they contain 50 times the CO2 of the atmosphere, right? The oceans murmur, the weather changes. That's it. But we have oscillations, what you brought up with the cycles. If I have a cycle like that, and I started at the peak, and just look at the downward side, I can predict hell coming up, right? Because I've just taken one section of it. I could have taken the upside of it and predicted it the other way. So to understand something, which is the point you made in later problems, you've got to come out and see the cycles. So the biggest cycle is the 100,000-year one. I'm talking about what we call the Milankovitch cycles now. That's the distance of the Earth from the Sun changes. Then we've got the tilt of the Earth changes. At the moment, we're about 23.5 degrees or so. That actually changes. Yes? That changes everything, I'll tell you. And that's on a 40-odd thousand-year cycle.
So we're not, so like Ice Age and all that, like we're not...
The Ice Ages are caused by Milankovitch cycles more than any other factor. They're every 100,000 years.
And we're
in an Ice Age now, you do know that.
Yeah. It is cold.
No, we're in an Ice Age now. Oh, no.
Explain.
I can explain with going to this graph. So I'll pause while you edit this in.
Okay.
I'm going to play a bit of a video, okay? Right, this video explains a little bit. This is the history of CO2. Yeah? To study the history of CO2, we're going to take you back 550 million years. And then we're going to take you back about 400,000 years. And then we're going to take you back about 300 years. Right? For you to understand the history of CO2. So we start with this.
And here we have, going back 550 million years, all the geological periods since then. On that graph, in blue, it's plotted the CO2 levels going back in geological time. And you can see here, we start at between 7,000 and 8,000 parts per million. Compare that to today's 420 parts per million. But as life buried that CO2, the CO2 diminished and diminished over time, until by the end of the Permian, there had been the greatest extinction ever, and the cause was the lack of CO2. But salvation, not to worry. The Triassic breakup of Pangaea, that huge continent, commenced, and the volcanic activity increased the levels of CO2 right up to the end of the Jurassic there. But then it started to decrease until today we were down to 280 parts per million pre-industrial. Had we carried on at the same trajectory, in just 2 million years, life would have ceased to exist on Earth. It would have buried its own life gas, CO2.
Are you saying if we carry on this way, we're going to be extinct?
Yeah, what happens is... What happens... Sorry.
Push the mic to it, that's it. Yeah.
What happens is this. If it gets to 150, all vegetation dies. If all vegetation dies, animals die, we die. Everything dies. So we came very close to it in the last glaciation. Now, as long as you've got ice at the North and South Poles, we're in an ice age. That's unusual for the Earth, right? But we're in an ice age. And that's why I say we're in an ice age. What you're thinking about are glaciations. Glaciations where you got half a mile of ice over Birmingham, yeah? That's a glaciation. And in between glaciations, you have little respites. I've got graphs of it where we're out of it, and this is the bad news coming. These gaps where we get warmer, and like we're in now, we're still in the glacier, we're still in an ice age, but outside the glaciation only lasts between 10 and 15,000 years. And then we go back into a big glaciation, back into the half a mile of ice.
So will we have a time anytime soon where Antarctica would be just land or no?
Say again?
Well, you're saying we're in an ice age now. So there's obviously times when we're not in an ice age, yeah? Correct?
You'd have to wait 100,000 years. But we're in an ice age now. We're not in a glaciation. There's a difference. As long as you've got ice at the caps, scientifically, we're in an ice age.
Yeah.
Most of Earth's history, we've had no ice at the caps. We had no Arctic or Antarctic ice. Which is why you can find animals in... There are certain... I remember being on radio once, it was LBC, and I was a young student on there who'd studied climate, at university. I asked the question, how much would the seas rise if the whole of the Arctic melted? Yeah? And everyone should know the answer to that. Everyone. And the answer is none, because it's floating ice. It just takes up its own hold in the water. Doesn't change the ice level at all. Doesn't change sea level at all.
Yeah, well, I've heard this. I think if you had like an ice cube.
Yes, that's right.
If you have an ice cube, and if you fill up the water to its brim of a cup with the ice in there, if the ice melts, you'd think you would overtopple.
Same level.
But it wouldn't. You would just, yeah.
Because the ice is like an iceberg. It's 9/10 below water.
So it's sitting, it's making that gap.
And all it does, it's making a hole. And when it melts, it's less dense than water because it's floating. When it turns into water, it just fills up its original hole.
Yeah.
That's the way to think about it.
But you hear the ice caps are melting, sea levels are rising.
Oh, well, I've got.
So would you say that's a huge lie then?
It's a lie, yes. Well, sea levels are rising. I'll do sea levels.
But I do want to get your take on that.
We didn't go to.
I want to get your take on the wildfires. I want to know. Have you ever heard of the term weather manipulation and direct energy weapons and that type of stuff, where they will use direct energy weapons to destroy things and blame it on climate change?
That's total nonsense. All this thing about contrails and that is nonsense.
Really?
Absolute nonsense. There has been, ever since we had aeroplanes right way back.
Well, you could easily jump on that, couldn't you, if with your agenda, but you're going against that, yeah?
Totally. But why should I jump on something that can't be true? You'd need... Look, there is such a thing as cloud seeding. Now, water vapour is invisible. There's only one person on Earth who can claim to see it, and that's Greta, yeah? But outside Greta Thunberg, no one else in the world can see water vapour. She can see CO2, which, it's very difficult to see. Anyway, I forgot what I was on there.
So basically, what I'm saying is, those in the world of climate change,
yes.
a conspiracy theorist would say, who doesn't believe in climate change, someone who don't believe in climate change would say that the globalists or the people in charge of this...
I'm not into that.
They would say that they're using, HARP and fake weather manipulation to
Look, there was
push the agenda.
Cloud seeding went on in the 1930s and things. If you've got water vapour in the atmosphere, it's good high, and you put the nuclei there for the drop to form around it, you can create rain. So it's a hit and miss job. But cloud seeding is real cloud seeding, right? The idea, though, that these planes are all, doing these wakes to feed and change weather. All cloud seeding, if it works, does is change weather locally. Before the 1st of May parade in Moscow, big day for them, they did cloud seeding before to try and get rid of the moisture in the atmosphere so it wouldn't rain on May Day. Yeah, so you can do that. But that's totally separate to what they're claiming. They're claiming weather modifications. One frontal system coming into the UK has got the energy of many atomic bombs, baby, many nuclear bombs. You can't possibly change climate with that. You can't. What you can do, and when we had 9/11 and there were no planes over America, the atmosphere was crystal clear. Yeah, crystal clear. Because if you look at the planes, it's huge amounts of them. And they can give it like a mist. They can change the opacity slightly. But as regards feeding in chemicals to change weather or climate, no. And don't forget, the difference between weather and climate is weather is what happens now. But if you're going to look at climate, you say, I've got a flood in Poland. If you're going to talk climate, you've got to show the floods in Poland going back. What your point is, from common sense again, in cycles, or whatever, yeah? And did it change? Did we concrete over the catchment then? There's lots of other factors.
Was this just an anomaly, or is this a part?
So you can't do that. So I'm totally opposed to, I have to be, because there's no scientific evidence for it. I've looked. There's none. And to think that commercial planes, ordinary jets...
Well, they say that they're using chemtrails to block the sun, the heat, to protect us because we've burned the ozone layer.
No. It's nonsense. Some people who follow me, I've just said it on the way here, I stopped actually to answer someone who brought it up. And I just said, no, it's not true. And it's not. And you've got to understand where I come from. Go to those first principles, yeah? Which are appeals to authority, no, right? Consensus, no. Evidence and observation.
Yeah, well, this don't appeal to authority. These are people who are not authority saying this kind of
No,
thing.
it isn't an appeal to authority, but there's a little mini consensus of them.
Yeah.
But there's no science there. There's no evidence there.
Okay.
It wouldn't be physically possible.
Well, you don't think we've got the technology to do that? You don't think we got the technology?
You'd have to change climate. You'd have to have tens and tens of thousands of planes going continuously.
But they're not trying to. No, they're not saying they're changing the climate. They're saying this is their agenda. So basically,
why would they do it?
The government are manipulating events, wildfires, tornadoes, storms, and then they're using that evidence to tell the public, look, climate change, look, we're having wild...
Nonsense, that's nonsense.
Fair enough.
Nonsense.
Well, I'm glad I've got that thing.
This is the chart of the ice ages. Where you dip below the line, that's the sort of greenish colour.
Yeah.
They're glaciations, yes?
Yeah.
And where you go up above is the little periods we have, and they last between 10 and 15,000 years. We're now right at the end there. That's where we are. And we're 11,000 years into it, and the average gap is 15,000. So almost certainly within the next, any time, we could go into an ice age. Any time. Could be 1,000 years away, could be 3,000 years away, could be 500 years away. No one knows. But we are going to go in, because look at the pattern.
Well, that's the one we're in right now is quite a long stint.
Correct.
We're
near the end of our stint. Yes. And near the end of our stint.
So they can talk about climate change as much as they want. It's just our destiny from our cycles.
I'm afraid so. And if you go to the next graph, because I said in one, this is 300 years now. Now, the CO2 put in by man, the graph is there, right? At the bottom, you can see it coming up from about 1850 and up, right? That's the CO2. But actually, we started warming 150 years before then. So we started warming from about the end of the 1600s. We started warming, yeah? So it wasn't mankind there. We didn't have any industrial revolution, right? So what those three graphs did, it brought it right up to date. So our forest fires, if I look at the NASA data, you'll see the NASA show worldwide forest fires have decreased, yes? And if you look at the other world data, you'll see the forest fires have decreased. So when you look at the actual scientific data, they've decreased.
Okay. What happened with the Brecon bomb?
There's nothing to do with climate change. Right.
I think before we get to that, how I came across that was the talk of what you talk about.
Yeah.
Some people would like to get at you. They don't like what you talk about.
No, but this wasn't to do with climate. Okay. No, it's a personal thing. What happened is I may be okay at science and technology, but I'm not good at choosing women, right? Except for the very last one, which I've been with, not 19 years. But I went through a divorce. I had 4 kids. I went through a divorce. I looked after the kids. She went. And I was that. She was a normal person. And then I was in my 40s and I met a lady. And in the end, she turned out to be a psychopath. And what happened one day was someone came to see me, and they said I had a lake, and someone came to see me and said, well, actually, what happened was they were fishing my lake without permission. So I went out and grabbed their rods and told them off. I called the police. The police came, and I told them if they leave now, and that's it. They had a letter from my wife they could fish, but she doesn't live there anymore. From my ex, she wasn't divorced at that time. We weren't divorced, and so I pointed out, I just put the fish in. It's any fish they're taking is theft to the police. But if they go now, fine, they went. But one of them came back and said, basically, I've been offered 20,000 quid to kill you. Yeah, I think she should know that. And so I informed the police. The police put an emergency alarm right to the police station against the bed. That's what they did. And I was going through a bad time personally, and I one night I learned I became a sleuth because one of my friends, I can say it now because I couldn't say it then, was a civil servant looking after the range at Sennybridge for the army, and I heard that people who were trying to kill me had stolen explosives. Right? How? And so I said to my friend, when you have a bang, and it's called PE4, plastic explosive, and when you have a bang, how do you know how many sticks went off? Because you issue out of a book. Yes, we sign them out, and they issue them. So I said, but the wind can change the direction. You can't tell by the size of the bang. Oh, no, you can't. So I said, that's how they're getting it out. I turned out to be right. I put a whole case together by myself that turned out to be right. This ended up with 2 30-minute television documentaries on Wales this week, by the way. And so then I told the police they're stealing plastic explosive, but I don't know who. And I did lots of things. It got convoluted. But and then one night, one morning at about 5 o'clock, a phone went and said there's been an explosion last night in Brecon. A house has been, end terrace house has been blown off. And it turned out that the people were organising, let's say, a bomb. So they had stolen 12 sticks of PE4, I think, and they took 2 of the sticks and gave them to 2. This involves drugs now. They were into the drug world, yes? And at this time, I did not know, because it's really a hell of a story, that the police thought I was a drug baron of Wales. I've never done pot. I've never done anything in my life, even through the 60s. So the police were treating me in a funny way, actually. It was really funny. And I didn't know. And then my solicitor told me that my wife had been prosecuted for fraud. I knew all about that. But they didn't tell me what day in the court. And the Crown Prosecution Service, which I can now say because I got to say it at the time, told my solicitor, oh, he's the biggest drug baron of Wales, and we're going to let her off with a year's conditional discharge for, 10 or 20 grand's worth of fraud. And and my solicitor knew I wasn't, so knew me. And so I phoned up the police and said, Brecon Police Station. I said, like, they said, who is it? I said, it's apparently Paul Burgess, the biggest drug baron in Wales, because I want you to come and search my house. I want you to talk to me because I'm not, But they've fallen for it. They completely fallen for it. So they just ignored my things about the P4. So that's the background. So one morning I got phoned up and I phoned the police and said, look, if P4 is involved in this explosion, then I now have a good idea where it's coming from. Yeah? And then they phoned me. The policeman I knew phoned me. I came round. 2 of them came round and said, well, you did tell us. Yeah, I said, I know. And it's complicated, but one of the people involved, my grass, if you like, had been taken off to prison on a drug charge on remand. They'd been on remand for months. And yet the actual offence was going to get just a fine. It was tiny, yeah? But they were keeping him on remand. And so I used a connection with the Home Office to get him out into a mental home and so I could speak to him because I was worried about people trying to kill me, and he knew all about it, right? So it's really complicated, isn't it? And so we went first they ignored me, the operation, and then they realised I maybe telling the truth. So I named a person, and they went to the house, and they captured the person and another person, and they captured one from the army and the one I knew, and he was stealing it, he was storing it, and they admitted it. Yeah. So at this point, I knew they admitted it, but they needed to know more. So we went to the mental home, for which I was now the nurse, if you like. Now, it's not a nurse. I was the official in charge of this person. So I had authority to be there because he was considered, I got a mental condition, and I was allowed to be his carer, if you like.
Yeah.
There's an official word for it because the police didn't want me there, but I said too bad, and the nurse said too bad, he's got to be there. And they said, look, we've arrested them, they've admitted it, and so on. And that was that, They'd blown themselves up because what they'd done is stick two P4 sticks together. They have a detonator they stick in, and they have a circuit to a thing, and they need the battery. And the battery they wanted was the flat battery out of a 9-volt battery out of a smoke alarm. So they were there. Now, the girlfriend, who was 16, was with the two bombers. And he had said to her, look, I'm leaving town. I've got a job to do tonight. I'm leaving town. You'll never be able to see me again. So she was upset. So she went out to the car to get some fags. She was too young to drive. So she opens the driver's door, leans across to the passenger seat to pick up the fags. Yes? When the end terrace becomes, it disappears. There's a next end terrace. The next one up became the end terrace. And what they'd done is they'd taken the battery out and they connected it when it hadn't actually, it was a closed circuit. And so one of them survived as a torso for days, and his mother came to see me, and she was on our side trying to get to the truth. But then the police did a terrible thing. They said I was lying. I hadn't told them. Right? Well, just like with Climate, I decided to bring the police to heel. I want the truth. So I contacted HTV, and they came to see me, and they knew I was telling the truth because they'd had contacts as well that I told the police. And so we did a program which exposed the police and told about the Brecon bomb. But then the police arrested my informant. He was out of the mental home then, and he got, for his thing, he got a fine. Yeah. I mean, ridiculous to keep a man in prison for months and months and months for an offence that is just a small fine. But never mind, that was part of the plot. So HTV did this program, and the police got upset, so they arrested the informant and said, perverting the course of justice by paying people to go on the program. Now, no one had been paid. No one had been paid. Money wasn't even mentioned. And so we went into Merthyr Crown Court, and the judge actually, at the beginning, made the point. I was a witness, and I had to sit outside. As you do in a court case, you sit outside. You can't know what's going on until it's after your turn. And but the judge apparently said, we've got Paul Burgess coming on, can't we get a policeman that he claims to have told on, who's got to go under oath that he didn't tell him? Yeah?
Yeah.
So the senior brass of the police came with this policeman in a room. I watched them because I was sitting outside in like a hall area. Then I was could smoke my pipe in those days. I don't smoke now, but I was smoking a pipe. And I watched him, and he went in. Then I went in after him. And when I went in after him, before I spoke and I gave my swore in, the judge said, I'm going to tell you something now. The policeman, so-and-so, has confirmed you told the police. So now, in court, on oath, a policeman had agreed I'd told the truth. Right? And then the jury, I went outside at the end of the trial. The jury got dismissed. You're ready to go, put in their room. And I didn't have time. I put my tobacco in my pipe. I was going to light it when we recalled. The jury literally walked in the room and said, innocent. Yeah? I mean, we'd proven it. And so they walked back. So I didn't have time to have a smoke even. And it was like Perry Mason because everyone, when they said not guilty, you know, that. So there was a second programme then, a second Wales This Week programme about how the police had covered up. Yeah? And they carried on covering up afterwards. And I'd never been...
Police in Wales have always been those.
I'd never been in trouble with the police in my life. I've never been arrested. You know, I've never had anything except a speeding fine, you know. And even that, you know, I think 2 in my whole life, and I'm 79. So maybe I'm just lucky. But that's my perspective. And of course, it was because the police thought I was... At one point, they came to my home and said, because I had grounds, and they said, would you mind bringing a police dog to smell out for explosives? And I said, not at all. They were actually smelling out for drugs, you know. And you wouldn't believe it. So
ultimately, you know, 2 people died trying to kill you.
Well, one of them died instantly because he was leaning over it, putting the battery on. The other one was a few feet and the table came up. But he lost, I think, all his limbs and everything. It really was bad. The doctor said, look, there's no hope here. But he was breathing. It was completely gone. I mean, there was no conscious. You know, he was conscious, but not conscious. He was not conscious. And his mother said, I don't want him to live. There's no point anyway. Yeah. I mean, blind, deaf, no limb, you know, just a torso. Really bad. And she was on my side because she wanted the truth out of it as well. And the police never did. And when they sentenced the 2 people for supplying the PE4, the police never investigated why they stole it. And the judge said, you know, one thing I'm certain of today is I've not heard the truth. Yeah.
Well,
and the police wouldn't investigate it, because for the police to investigate that, they'd have had to expose themselves to all this thing. When I pleaded with them to prove my innocence, because there was nothing they could do. You know, there's nothing, because I know I had nothing to do with anything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's fascinating.
So that was one episode. But I have a Forrest Gump life. So, I mean, I make fantastic predictions. I walked down the street in Liverpool when I was a kid. I was 14 or something like that. And and I was with my cousin. She was the same age. We're walking down the Castle Street, it was, in Liverpool. And the Beatles were coming the other way. They were a local group. And they were pushing each other in leather jackets and messing about. So I said, I think we'd better cross the road. And as we crossed the road, she said, they're going to be famous one day. And I said, never will they be famous. Yeah. So I could make good predictions way back.
Yeah, I don't know if these charts are, I don't know if I trust them as much now you told me that story.
Just what?
I don't think I trust your charts anymore with these predictions.
No, right. They're not my charts, by the way.
No, I know. You go on data. I respect that. Just Stop Oil.
Yes.
Another kind of thing I've heard is, as we've seen lately in the country with the riots and stuff and people protesting, getting locked up, etc. I was taught there's people who think that Just Stop Oil were kind of like the puppets with some of the ridiculous protests they did earlier on this year.
Yeah.
For an excuse for a bill to be passed to stop protesting. And you look at what's been happening, like I said, now people are getting locked up for protests. But it was because of the catalyst of what Just Stop Oil did with their protests. Do you see a link there or no?
No, I don't. I think Just Stop Oil are terrible. I think the foot soldiers are innocent, stupid people. I think behind them, well, one of them is in jail now. But I think behind that is a very evil plan based on an extreme form of communism and control of people. They won't debate me because they can't. Because one of the things I do is I just prove that they're on television. I said the IPCC are the authority, world authority, UN on climate change. Those are look all the scientific papers, etc. But they say humans have not caused anything to do with floods, droughts, blah blah blah. Right? And he wouldn't accept it, so he threw it away. Because when people can't accept their own authority being challenged, in this case, there's a lack of evidence. There is no evidence to show that mankind has increased or changed floods, droughts, lots of other things. So even wildfires, etc. So there's no science saying that. What there are alarmists saying that. So how does the UN work like that? I've shown you all the conferences make no difference. Well, the scientists work, and a lot of them do a good job. But when it comes to writing the summary report for policymakers, which is all the governments read, that's done by politicians. So it's a political thing, this climate alarmism. It's not based on science. It's a political thing. Now, the trouble is, you've got a couple of generations of scientists whose mortgages depend on it. That's the problem. Yeah, that's where we are. That's where it'll all fail. It'll all fail.
Yeah.
They haven't. It's not possible to do. All wind and solar today in Britain. If you add together all the wind and solar, about what proportion of our total energy, as by all the energy I mean everything, fuel, everything that we produce as a country, it's only 4.8%.
The rest is all.
They're not my figures. They're Ed Miliband's department's figures.
And what are they saying that they want to make that? They want to rise?
They want to get up to They want to get up to neutral CO2. So what we produce, they want to bury it is another one. It's unbelievable. These people don't understand technology or engineering on the lowest level. It's like being governed by absolute children. It really is. It really is that bad. Yeah, it really is. There is no excuse at all. And I went on. I was on GB News. I was invited on to talk about air turbulence, clear air turbulence.
Yeah.
Where you suddenly a plane suddenly gets it, and clear air is because you can't see it. Now I've been in jets. I've been in the cockpits of big jets where you can see the thunderstorm ahead. You just go around it. You with me?
Yeah.
But clear air, you see nothing, and suddenly bang. It's to do with the tropopause. Actually, it gets quite scientific. However, all I had to do was look at the evidence. So I took the evidence from the Federal Aviation Authority of all the reports of air turbulence. Yes, and it showed no change. So over since I've been doing records, there's no change. But University of Reading had done, we've done a model, a little bit of an area of the Atlantic, and, climate change is causing more air turbulence. And so this professor then, young professor, went on Facebook and attacked me as a fascist, right? Because of the Tommy Robinson thing. As a fascist, apparently I connected the old British national thing. I wasn't.
It's a BNP.
Yeah, I wasn't. And so on. And so I replied and said, well, why don't you, well, first of all, I'm not a member of any party even, but why don't you debate me? And he wouldn't. So then all the people below me said, let's debate me then. And he wouldn't debate anybody. And so I did a video on it. I exposed him. I exposed him totally for what he is, not a scientist, right? Because it's all about, he went all around the world with these interviews. Yeah, we've shown air turbulence, and he goes on all the American things and all this, and he gets fame. And he's now got his bit of fame as a scientist. That's how this works. And I took him down.
Good.
But I took him down with one graph. It wasn't complicated. No matter what you do, there's no more being reported. And the reporting is essentially, it's a rule, the very strict rules of when you report air turbulence.
And what they were saying was like air turbulence is getting more frequent.
Because of climate change. Everything is. Everything.
Well,
bridges fail because of climate change.
Yeah, well, you look at the movies we've seen over the past couple of years.
I know.
San Andreas, The Day After Tomorrow, all very
just
frightening.
Yeah. Can I explain something in real simple terms about weather?
Yeah.
If I have two places and they've got exactly the same pressure, the same temperatures, the same weather, nothing happens between them. Right? If I have one place with more pressure than the other, wind will flow between them. Air will flow, causing wind. If I have a difference in temperature, it'll cause wind to flow as well. Right? If you have the northern hemisphere and both sides agree on this, any change in world temperature and climate starts at the Antarctic and the Arctic and works in. The equator doesn't change. It's the Arctic and Antarctic. Changes in. If you've got warm weather, or warmer weather in the north, then between the tropics and the north, you'll have less difference. The job of a hurricane is to take heat from the tropics
Hot and cold, yeah.
and twirl it up to orbit, right? Heat travels from hot to cold. So that's its job. It does that. The reason it does it as a pattern is because we're spinning as an Earth. Otherwise, it'd do that, right? So it does that. So there are less hurricanes now because of this. This year, let's take that example. This year, they forecast the worst hurricane season for years. It's actually the least hurricane season for 51 years, right? The exact opposite of what they forecast. The exact opposite.
But I bet they won't hold their hands up and say they were wrong.
Oh, no, they'll look for excuses. But if they followed... My job is to bring science to everyone, and I try to make it interesting. So I've used a bit of comedy in it. I use a lot of graphics in it. So I've got Ed Miliband pushing the old age pensioners off the cliff, right? So he can grab their money. Yeah.
How is he still on the scene,
Ed Miliband is the most dangerous man in Britain.
Really?
Yeah, he is, because he is making us so much poorer, and he's committing us...
More than Keir Starmer.
Well, it's hard to make up my mind, I'll be honest. But
Are they?
Ed Miliband...
They're the same, though, yeah?
Ed Miliband is signing up contracts to force us into super high prices on energy for years to come, 15 years ahead. And it's all going to fail. It's all going to fall down.
Is there any famous politicians or famous figureheads who have the same viewpoints as you?
I wouldn't say the same. People reform...
On climate change.
Right, I'm talking about that. Richard Tice of Reform, he's the deputy leader now, wants to stop net zero, wants to stop this whole nonsense. So he's 100% with me on that. And so, yes. But I don't know, I've never been able to discuss with him the detail of the science, as it were. So I don't know how, because I say we want more CO2. There's my badge. We want more CO2. Well, I love it. I don't know whether he's that far yet. But he does know there's something really wrong with it, because even if they were right, what we do makes no difference. So why would you stop the old age pensions, get the 300 quid, and spend billions on waste products, on useless products? I mean, to make hydrogen to use the fuel, to make what we call green hydrogen, 4 times the cost of normal fuel. So you're not going to do it, are you? 4 times. And yet they've just taken 500 million and thrown it in that direction. They've taken 1.5 billion and thrown it on offshore wind, in floating offshore wind and things. It's madness.
What's the resolution to this then? You're saying it's going to collapse, it's going to fail, but is there a resolution? Is there hope for us, or are we just going down this, ever-pending...
We'd have to spend trillions. I mean, if you had batteries, it would cost... If you had batteries to back up our power system, it would cost, 3.7 trillion or so pounds every 10 years. We can't do that. It's so expensive, it's beyond belief. And it would cost more than that, because that's today's cost. If you put that demand on the world, there aren't enough resources to do it. So there isn't enough copper and everything to do it. So in fact, if you made every light vehicle, the vans and the cars in Britain, electric, there aren't enough resources in raw materials in the world to do that without causing major crisis.
Well, I notice you drive an electric car.
Yeah, I do. I drive a Tesla. Yeah.
Yeah. Is that normal for someone who doesn't?
No. But I'm very open about it. No, I hate driving. I'm 79. And so I was coming up, I had an Audi, nice Audi, and it needed changing, yeah? And so I was coming up to buy a car, so I thought the most logical thing to buy was a hybrid, because 85% of journeys from Britain, 90% are within 15, 20 miles, back there and back. You go to the shops and back.
Yeah.
You go this and back. So most of the time you're on electric, and that makes the city cleaner. It makes sense. But for a long journey, you've got your diesel or your petrol. But when I looked at it, the no one had really got it right except BMW. BMW had a model that gave me, they claim a 50-mile range. Now, with electric, if they claim 50 miles, you can't use that. You'd only get maybe 35, 30 miles out of that, right, in real life. So by the time you put the heater on, the radio on, or you have cold weather and all that. So I chose a Tesla because it drives me everywhere. Like no other car. So when I came here to your studio, 90% of the driving, I just leave my hands on the wheel and it does it. That is wonderful for me because I hate driving, and that's the only reason. Would I advise anyone else to buy a Tesla? Only if they like it from that aspect, but I think it'd be very expensive and my wife just bought a car and that's petrol, right? And I wouldn't, I mean, she hates my Tesla anyway, but I would not buy, so if it wasn't for the automated driving, I wouldn't touch it. But there is one big advantage to it. It produces more CO2 than it'll ever save.
Oh, there we are. Then. We love CO2.
And we love CO2.
If we carry on this trajectory with this agenda of climate change is real, where are we in 10 years' time?
I'll be 80 in January, so I'm reckoning round about 5 years is 2030, which is when they have the plan for the net zero thing, which is ridiculous. By then, I think it should have collapsed. And I think it'll collapse because of the money, the demand for money, and the madness. And we're heading for rationing, blackouts, and all sorts of things. So how much damage is... The only question is how much damage is done by Meriband and Meriband between now and then.
What you say we blackouts, droughts, no, blackouts.
Yeah. Blackouts or rationing.
Yeah. Well, you think that is definitely coming first?
Oh, yeah. Well, it's already happened. There's a thing, in fact, the word we use now, what's it called? It's a German word we use for blackouts because they've had them. If you go to California in America, they have time.
EMPs and shit. Is it EMP, electrical, or EMT?
What?
When the grid goes down. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, the grid goes down. Well, what they do to avoid the grid going down is they ration it. They cut off areas. So we'll turn off the power supply to this area for 3 hours. Then we'll take to that area and so on. So there'll be rationing. Or they'll ration you on your smart meter. Yeah. And you can do it on a smart meter.
Well, so you might not have no electric for a...
Oh, yeah, that's what it means. Because, let me explain something. When the wind stops, it doesn't just stop locally. It stops in the whole of the UK, right? In 2018, we had 9 days when there was no wind power at all. 9 days, right? That is just one example. But you can get... It's the same as droughts in my resources side when I did simulations. You can get a year with a bit less, and another year with a bit less, and another year, and that can be as bad as a sharp 9 days without. Wow. So there's 3 types of drought. There's what we call the intense drought, and then the accumulated deficit drought. The accumulated deficit is you never, ever catch up with where you were, and it's a bit like an overdraft on a bank balance. It hits there, and you get worse and worse over time. You never do get back up. It's a bit like that. That's the second. And then there's just a long drought, the long continuous, shallow drought, but long. So there's 3 types of drought, and it's very much the same with the electric.
When you hear people say about, politicians and people who are fighting for, climate change, it's real, and then they're flying around in their jets and their cars, how does that make you feel?
Well, to me...
Even though you're someone who don't believe in climate change, but still has a Tesla.
I've got an image here, and I'll assume I'll stop and say we're going to show it now, right? Yeah. Obama's house in Hawaii, because he comes from Hawaii, so he's the one going on about flooding everywhere. Yeah. So big on it, and the ocean actually laps his garden wall. That's how close it is. It isn't even on the beach; it's there, and I've got the water against his wall, right? That's called hypocrisy. But I'm almost immune to it. It doesn't make me feel anything different because I know the truth, and I know that these people are nobodies. These people are absolute nobodies, except they run the world.
Yeah, that's quite a statement. They're nobodies except they run the world.
Well, that's right, because... all right, then. I'll tell you a story about a Welsh MP, Simon Hart, and he was the chief whip in the government for the Conservatives, yes? So one of the things I like to tell everyone is this, a bit like we don't orbit the sun. Here's another one. And a bit like if the Arctic melts, the seas don't rise. Here's another one. When you ever see a wind farm and a solar farm advertised, they'll say, we supply 10,000 homes. Yeah? It's not true. Because if I said to you, my wind farm supplies 10,000 homes, enough power for 10,000 homes, what would you take that to mean?
Say that again. What you mean?
If I say to you, my wind farms can supply all the power for 10,000 homes, what would you take that to mean?
You've got
10,000 homes.
Yeah.
And it doesn't. Every single case, this is no exception. The public out there can check it themselves, right?
Yeah.
What they say is 10,000 homes according to Ofgem, which is the average home, they quote. But the average home is 80% gas and 20% electric. So they're only supplying the 20%. So when they say 10,000 homes, what they mean is this. I can supply 10,000 homes, providing 80% of the energy is coming from gas. And when there's no wind or solar, I can't supply any without the gas, that it's 100% gas, right? Therefore, every single wind and solar farm in the UK deceives you on what it can supply. Every single one, without exception. And I was asked to help near Swansea with a solar farm going up there. And I went to the public meeting with the experts. You could ask the experts questions. So let me explain very simply. A megawatt is a million kilowatt, right? A megawatt is a speed of energy. It is not an amount.
Yeah.
A megawatt hour is an amount. You buy at home, you don't buy a kilowatt, you buy a kilowatt hour, right? So if you've got a 2-bar fire going on, 2 kilowatt fire, in 1 hour, you'll pay for 2 kilowatt hours.
Yeah, of course.
So I woke up and I said, how much energy does your solar farm produce? 20 megawatts. So I said, no, how much energy in terms of megawatt hours? No, 20. And, they couldn't understand me. They didn't even understand the difference in the units. So I went up, I will take you to the boss. Went to the boss. He didn't understand either. So I then got into it. And that's when I uncovered this 20%. Yes? And it's right the way through. So I go to my MP at the time, Simon Hart.
Okay.
And I write to him and say, this is it. There's a little video, it explains it. And he wrote back and said, I won't listen to you. You're a conspiracy theorist. So I wrote back and said,
You're a conspiracy.
I'm a conspiracy theorist. I said, this is simple maths. You divide. I'm only asking you, and my little video, which I've done, I've got it here. In that little video, all you have to do is divide one number by another. It's one calculation. One calculation. So when you say according to Ofgem, according to Ofgem, there's the Ofgem from the Ofgem site, 20% electric, 80% gas. There's the calculation, only supplying the 20%. Yeah? No, that's conspiracy theorist. Every single public talk I give since, including in the UK Parliament, in the committee room, including the other man everywhere, I mention Simon Hart as arrogant ignorance. I sit in the green rooms sometimes and meet ex-ministers and things, and I'm amazed by the lack of intelligence.
Yeah.
I'm just amazed.
Yeah. What are you concerned about 15-minute cities then? Do you think, what's the percentage of that actually coming into play?
20%. It depends on the public. It depends on how the public... I think if the public understood, you'd only be allowed 100 journeys, that your wife can't just go and buy a dress, because she's only got the local shop which has got 3 dresses on offer. Because you can't have all the specialities in a sandwich. In anything you want to buy a lead, HDMI lead, right?
Yeah.
It's not going to be local. That's how our society developed. That's what I tried to explain before. So, but I believe if you suddenly imposed it now, there'd be revolt. But they're doing it bit by bit.
Yeah.
And it's that bit by bit that's the worrying bit. Because already already people accept that they won't debate you and it's okay. People accept.
Well, I've seen that with the one fella on GB. He didn't want to debate at all.
So,
And you was offering data on pieces of paper. And he's just like, yeah, it's just a bit of paper.
hold on. But the funny thing about Jim Dale was every bit of paper I offered, before he saw it, I got a funny story on this, before he saw it, would say it's no good. He hadn't even looked at it, right?
Yeah.
But there was one case where the producer, before it came the day before, said, oh, it's Jim's turn. He's got a piece of paper to show. He's given it to us to show up. So I said, oh, good. And so that night, my wife went to bed early. I went and sat by, I remember this, and I said, this is the graph he's going to show. And she said, how do you know? She's the one. To take me down, all you need is a wife, and they will knock you down, right? Because wives always try to take the bullish part of you out. I said, I know he's going to do this. This is going to be, I know exactly how he thinks. This is going to be the graph, right? So there I was with the graph ready. So he then, and it goes on the screen, it goes on the television, he's sitting there, Nana Akua sitting between us. And so I've got it in front of me, and he shows his graph. And then I show him, and I said, look, it's the same graph. And he said, no, it can't be the same. I said, it is. It's the same graph. It's the same graph. And he turned it down as the same. It was his graph, right? I was right, and of course, he had totally misinterpreted the graph. It's frustrating. That is frustrating.
Kipper, yeah.
I wish I could have somebody who was more serious. Yes, I wish. But the serious ones won't do it because they have a mortgage to pay.
Well, if we found someone good enough to debate, would you do a debate?
Yeah, I would.
Yeah.
I'd jump at it.
Yeah.
Anyway, I don't even have to know who they are. Lance would like to know, but I don't mean I'm agreeing to do it regardless of who they are.
Yeah.
Right? Provided they've got on the other side and are going to debate me properly, yeah, great.
So, from what I've gathered, then your
by the way, everyone who's tried to arrange one has failed.
Okay.
Every single person.
You're trying to give us a challenge here now.
There's a challenge there. And I'd love a debate.
From my perspective, I gather that to you, climate is always going to change.
Correct.
It always has changed.
And we could do it more warmth.
Yeah, we could do it more warmth, actually. From the data we see, we've been at worse points in our not-so-distant past.
Mm-hmm.
But we are going to have an ice age. It's part of the cycle of life. And
we're going to have a glaciation.
We're going to have another glaciation,
yeah.
Right. And we should really just live how we have the past 100 years and not bend the knee to these ideologies to try and prevent things, because a lot of it is sinister and it's to gain.
That's right, absolutely.
Off a small population rather than...
Yeah, you're totally correct. It's going to be what it's going to be. But there are cycles we know about, and the multi-decadal Atlantic oscillation is a big one. That's where the whole of the North Atlantic from the equator upward heats up and cools on a 70-year cycle. So roughly, it can be 30, but 30 years warm, 35 years cool. We're just coming into the cool part of that.
So it's been...
I predict, on the signs that I see, and I can't be certain about this, just on the evidence, the balance of evidence, at the moment, I think we're going to cool from now to 2035. And
Britain as well.
Wasn't my work. It's Professor Valentina Sarkova.
That's for the Americas, yeah?
Pardon?
For the Americas.
No.
You just said on the North American plane.
Oh, no, sorry. North Atlantic.
North Atlantic. So you think that we're going to be cold?
It's going to cool. The whole world's going to cool between now and 2035, according to Valentina Sarkova, a scientist from Northumberland University, and I totally support that. I've done a video on it. I did a video years ago on it. The evidence is growing. This year, we only have to look. There's been big cold parts of the Atlantic, and they can't understand it because, hold on, and it's breaking all the records for coldness. Why? Right? And the reason is it doesn't change like that. it comes over gradually, so you get hots and colds, but the pattern is colder and colder.
And we don't understand why we're having terrible summers and, you know.
Yes. Well, actually, what's happening is it's very hard. One of the things our cover shows is why we're having better weather in May than we get in July. Right? We're having a skewed season. Now, the reason for the skewed season is to do with the base centre, because the alarmists didn't understand that bit about the base centre, because the distance to the sun does a huge, complicated squiggle in its path, and it changes the distance to the Earth on that. They haven't allowed for it. And that and the tilt, is part of the reason why it gets complicated, this, but it's part of the reason why we're having better springs than we are summers.
Was there ever a point in your life where you believed in climate change and you believed?
Well, I believed in the alarmists.
The alarmists, sure.
What happened was, I don't forget, I was steeped in it in my early thing. I'm scientifically trained in it in that sense, but I didn't stay in it. I was in business, and I was on a plane, and I decided to watch, the video, that big video. I forgot the name of it now, memory. On climate, and I thought Al Gore's video.
Yeah.
And I thought, crikey, I've got to examine this. This could be serious. And the wife said, is it? And I said, well, what it's just said is, because he had scientific graphs. He had the hockey stick, and he went on a big platform to show you. None of that's worked. Every single prediction he made is wrong, and so it got me into it. So I think I left for a few months, and then I started to examine it all.
Yeah,
and within. As a part-time thing, and then the alarmism started around me, so I thought I'd better examine this then. I examined it and came to the conclusion this is absolute nonsense.
So if I give you a name then, if I say Greta Thunberg, how would you describe her?
Give me a what? Sorry, this...
If I say the name Greta Thunberg, how would you describe her?
Say the name?
Greta Thunberg. How would you describe her?
In this video, Greta is interviewed in the Senate and a committee by a member, and what the video shows is Greta declaring, "I want you to panic." Everyone knows that, and then they ask the question, "Why do you want people to panic? What scientific work sort of caused you to think people should panic?" Yeah. "Oh no, there's none. They're just words. I don't mean people to panic." "Oh, now tell me what scientific work or paper you can refer to, anything, led you to this concern about the climate?" "Oh no, there's no scientific work at all. Not at all. None. Zero."
This is all wrong. I shouldn't be up here. I should be back in school on the other side of the ocean. Yet you all come to us young people for hope. How dare you? You have stolen my dreams and my childhood with your empty words, and yet I'm one of the lucky ones. People are suffering, people are dying, entire ecosystems are collapsing. We are in the beginning of a mass extinction, and all you can talk about is money and fairy tales of eternal economic growth. How dare you?
Adults keep saying we owe it to the young people to give them hope. But I don't want your hope. I don't want you to be hopeful. I want you to panic. I want you to feel the fear I feel every day. And then I want you to act.
Mr. Chairman, Ms. Thunberg, thank you for your involvement here today. I commend you for your willingness to testify and get involved with public policy. In the past, when you're talking about climate change, you have said, quote, "I want you to panic. I want you to feel the fear I feel every day." Is there what particular study or scientific report did you read that made you come to this conclusion?
Thank you for your question. First of all, let me just clear that those are metaphors. In speeches, you often use metaphors. Of course, I don't mean literally that I want people to panic. So So there was no scientific study that made me come to that conclusion.
Fucking hell.
What?
What an idiot.
And then you can go around, meet presidents, become a millionaire, meet presidents, do everything, and there's no science at all. That shocks people, doesn't it? What I do is I put the work together to show everyone who doesn't know about it, to make them understand. So I use shock things. Now, this is a graph of the Great Barrier Reef. The red dots are when they had the bleaching events. Today, it is at a record high level. And in fact, the recent one, this is 23, 24 has gone even higher. So it's healthier than it's ever been. But I'd like to show you a video now of an honest man, and he's a scientist. He's a scientist who studied, he's a professor, who studied the barrier reef with his team from Australia for Cook University. Basically, he lost his career. Do you know what he did that was really silly?
Told the truth?
Yep, he told the truth. So let me actually show you. And this is little his. And this will now train everyone on the truth about the Great Barrier Reef. Okay?
Yep.
If you want all the important information about the Great Barrier Reef in one concise report, it's time to download the State of the Great Barrier Reef 2024 report. And now I'm going to tell you all about it, so you probably don't really need to download it after all. First, all 3,000 of the individual reefs of the Great Barrier Reef still have excellent coral. We haven't lost a single reef since Captain Cook sailed down this coast in 1770. Next, when you add up all the coral on those 3,000 reefs, we've never had more coral than in the last couple of years, since records started in about 1986. This despite all the hoo-ha about the loss of coral from hot water bleaching events. Next, we have twice as much coral now than in 2012 after a few devastating cyclones, and the explosion in coral has been the species types that are most susceptible, supposedly, to hot water bleaching events. Next, corals grow faster in warmer water, a lot faster. Next, the coral growth rates have not declined in the last 400 years. Next, we've not lost a single species of plant or animal on the Great Barrier Reef. None. So why don't you celebrate?
Just another,
You see, it's
another
everywhere.
perception that I thought it was dead, like, or dying.
Pardon?
Just another perception that I had of the coral reef dying out.
So, it's everywhere. Now, I could spend 30 minutes just on the Great Barrier Reef or on coral reefs around the world, and I could explain this in common sense terms. If it was temperature, for example, that affected the coral that way, if you go north of the Great Barrier Reef, you come to an area called the Coral Triangle, and that area is the best coral in the world, and that's 2 to 3 degrees higher anyway. Coral loves high temperatures, right? Loves them. Islands sinking. The islands in the Pacific and in the Indian Ocean have all grown. 8% for the Indian Ocean, I think, growth, right? So they've all grown. The island that was most exposed to sinking in the world, everyone said, was Tuvalu in the Pacific. It's grown 2.8%, right? By measuring on a satellite, you get it exactly. So every bit you can look at on extreme weather and the scare stories are wrong. They're not spread in particular. Some scientists sell their souls, but basically a lot don't. And what you're getting is the journalists who don't have a clue, just repeat the propaganda. They like the headline, that bum, And my wife looked out the window yesterday and she said, hold on, we've just been told there's going to be a big climate event this afternoon. And it was beautiful weather, I mean, this is the world we live in now. It's a world where journalists take a subject and run. But the key to it all, and this is a big thing now, the key to everything is they can't afford to debate. They can't afford to have it challenged. So they have to say the matter's settled. They have to put you in a box. And that putting you in the box should be the warning sign for everybody. Everybody. And any child ever listening to this, think open. Don't think. And don't let them put you in the box, because that's all they're trying to do.
Paul, I want to say it's been a pleasure. It's been a pleasure speaking to you. yeah, thank you very much for coming on. It's been an interesting conversation. We've gone here, and everywhere.
Yeah.
Yeah, you know, maybe what we do with all our guests really is we ask them just on the camera, if maybe again, just a message to the people.
Yeah.
If you put the mic down your thing and straight down the camera.
Yeah, put the mic up close.
Yeah, and give your final message to people on it.
Well, I've been asked to give a final message, and the message I'd like to give is this. Most important thing in all our lives is children. And we really have to get the children to understand that they're being taught a load of rubbish in many, many areas now. It started off with climate, and what they're being taught is simply wrong. You're being told it's science and it's not. But it extends now to all sorts of areas, from when's a man's a man, a woman, etc. It extends to everything. So, and you're going to find it extending outside that. You're going to be told it's wrong to eat meat. You're going to be told it's wrong to travel too much. You're going to be told this and that. And it's going to affect every single area of your life. And this is the process of putting you in this box. Don't let them put you in a box. And don't let, above all, the children be in a box. Open the box for them. Let them out. Thank you for watching.
Guys, I hope you enjoyed this podcast. I enjoyed it very, very much. I want to say a big thank you to Paul again. Make sure you hit that like button, you subscribe to the club, and stay central.
The Central Club.